The war between Russia and Ukraine has reached a critical dimension, especially these days. The big offensive plans carried out by the Ukrainians, both on the southern front lines, especially in Zaporizhia and in the Donbas region, reached the Russian territory. So the war has completely moved to Russia. It was even claimed that the capital, Moscow, was among the attack plans of the Ukrainian armed forces, because at the moment, the capital, Moscow, has completely turned into a fireplace. After the attacks of unmanned aerial vehicles, the Russian Ministry of Defense announced that 5 drones attacked the territory of the Moscow region recently. Local residents in 5 residential areas also shared stunning videos of the violent explosions on social media. Let's explore together the breaking moments of these stunning drone attacks that shook the capital, Moscow. Our first stop is Vnukovo Air Base in Moscow. This is one of Russia's important military bases and logistics centers. First of all, the news of the explosion at the Vnukovo airport shook Moscow. A huge explosion occurred at the Vnukovo Air Base in Moscow, the heart of Russia. It was announced that the explosions were caused by unmanned aerial vehicles. A Baza Telegram channel reported that the unmanned aerial vehicles were a type of aircraft flying at an altitude of 200 meters. As a result of the drones hitting the Vnukovo Air Base, a fire broke out that could not be controlled for a long time. After a big explosion, Russian media reported that part of the flights moved from Vnukovo Airport to Sheremetyevo. In addition, these eruptions in Vnukovo continued in the Valuevo, Kubinka, Akhunshino, Marshkino and Kaluga regions. At first, the explosions in Vnukovo were reported by residents of Valuevo, near Moscow. Allegedly, residents of Valuevo heard the sounds of Russian air defense, after which columns of black smoke appeared in the sky. However, violent explosions were also claimed in the Valuevo residential area. Local residents were very worried that the explosions in Vnukovo would spread to Valuevo. On the other hand, residents of Marshkino also reported of the explosion at the Vnukovo Air Base. Black smoke and explosions made Russian citizens in Marshkino very uneasy. According to them, the smoke was coming from the Vnukovo airport. However, it was claimed that there were violent explosions in the Marshkino region, and that security measures were taken in this settlement. At the moment, Russian media reported that after the operation of the air defense systems, a total of 2 UAVs were shot down. It was also among the information that one of the UAVs used in the attacks near Moscow hit the Russian military unit in Kubinka. Moscow officials shared few details about the explosions at the Kubinka Air Base. After the explosion at the headquarters of the Kubinka military unit, the Russian authorities directly cut off the media connection with this area. Although few details were shared, the huge black smoke that formed in the airspace of this military unit in Kubinka greatly worried the local residents. Remarkable explosion. News also came from Akhunshino settlement, near Vnukovo Airport. Images of the explosions here were also published on social media. Local residents are quite restless because there are concerns about possible different explosions in the settlement. In short, Moscow and the residents of the region near this city had a long day because of the explosions currently. Security measures continue in 5 regions near Moscow. In addition to the physical effects of the explosions near Moscow, the political effects also angered Russian citizens. Currently, in addition to the fact that Moscow and important Russian cities, such as Rostov, are still in a complicated situation due to the Wagner rebellion, the voice of Russian citizens against the government has been raised. With the explosions striking, protests against the Putin regime were held in Moscow. These critical explosions near Moscow also greatly diminished confidence in the Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, and the Kremlin administration. The reason for this was the fact that even the capital, Moscow could be targeted if desired. Moscow officials had actually announced that, before these attacks, the capital was protected by much more air defense systems. It was also reported in the press that electronic warfare systems were placed on the tops of high-rise buildings in both Moscow and St. Petersburg. However, it seems that these measures taken by the Russians were not enough. Many political and military officials claim that the Ukrainian army carried out these striking attacks near Moscow, although the Russian authorities blamed Kiev for the 5 drone attacks that took place in Moscow. The Ukrainian authorities did not share any explanation on this issue. The Kiev administration did not claim responsibility for these attacks, but many international intelligence sources and Moscow officials agree that the Ukrainians carried out the attacks. Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin shared critical assessments about the drone attack. Sergei Sobyanin claimed that the UAVs were sent from the territory of Ukraine, but there's no conclusive evidence on this. It's not known exactly where the UAVs were sent from to Moscow. In fact, the Ukrainian armed forces had previously managed to carry out drone attacks and partisan actions against many Russian cities, including Moscow. In particular, the Belgorod region on western Russia's border with Ukraine has been bombed and attacked by drones hundreds of times. In fact, a war correspondent, Yuri Kutsinok, who followed the Russia-Ukraine war, recently stated on his Telegram channel that the Ukrainian army has turned Russia's border regions into a dead clash area. Among these areas, Belgorod has a special importance. It was among the most vibrant Russian cities on the Ukrainian border. But after the Ukrainian drone attacks on this city, Belgorod was completely turned upside down, and the signs of life in the city were almost gone. The inhabitants of the Belgorod region are now completely fed up with the war politics of the Russian administration in Ukraine, because people in the city no longer want to experience the war in their own homes. The attack in Belgorod, on the other hand, was an act of sabotage by a partisan group called the Freedom Legion for Russia, the Russian Volunteer Corps, and the Russian Freedom Legion crossed the border in March, and at the end of May, clashing with the border guards and regular forces of the Russian army. The Russian Freedom Legion then tried to capture Shebekino, with a population of 40,000, nearly a dozen villages and farms in and around the city faced shelling, blackouts, fires, and the panicked flight of thousands, as the district governor urged residents to leave temporarily. The Kiev administration did not comment on the raids in Belgorod and Shebekino. However, experts reported that all these attacks were a warning shot, and that larger attacks would affect other Russian cities in the coming days. Experts' predictions were confirmed by the drone attacks in Moscow. But according to some war analysts, these drone attacks near Moscow are not the real major attacks planned by the Ukrainian armed forces. In other words, in the coming days, much bigger and more violent attacks than all these offensive operations we have mentioned may affect Russia again. Putin is quite helpless on this issue, because the Russian leader cannot yet control the war on Ukrainian soil. Now that Russia is also under attack, Putin is completely in a dilemma. If the Russian leader shifts his defense initiatives to these areas in order to prevent drone missile, and sabotage. Attacks in his country. This time his troops on the territory of Ukraine will lack. In this regard, the Russian forces currently fighting in Ukraine have collapsed. In terms of military resources and morale. Motivation in summary. Russia's war in Ukraine didn't add anything positive to Putin or to Russian citizens. On the contrary, this war brought Russia back to the former Soviet era. Thanks for watching us.